So, Thomas Forster, at EcoAgriculture Partners, your focus is on city-region food systems. Could you give us a little background on what is EcoAgriculture Partners, and then tell us about your work in creating city-region food systems?
Sure, happy to, Dennis. EcoAgriculture Partners is a Washington, D.C. Policy and science nonprofit. It is the secretariat to a worldwide initiative called Landscapes for People, Food, and Nature. And it's really about integrated landscape management, and it's primarily rooted in rural landscapes. So we've been hearing about the urban food renaissance, to use Mary Chay's term. I think that's very real, and I myself started as an urban gardener at an undergraduate student level. The rural side of urban food systems is what I'd like to just emphasize a little bit here. So EcoAgriculture Partners is actually more on the rural side of the urban-rural continuum. The urban-rural continuum, or nexus as it's increasingly being called in the UN context, is a very hot topic right now. And we can come back to that later. But the local food, regional food, food shed, territorial food systems or food development in European and Latin American context are all shades of the same like-mindedness about the future of food, which is to say that cities alone can't feed themselves. Cities and their regions can get closer to feeding themselves, and even then, the mega cities of the world are probably always going to be supplied at practically a global level. But the balance is way off. And so city-region food systems is actually a very new coinage of an international multi-sectors. It involves many. You can look it up. cityregionsfoodsystems.org is a small website launched in October at the World Committee on Food Security in Rome, following a World Urban Forum call to action, which is also there. The call to action is simply bringing attention to this new framing of urban and rural together. And the call is also for a level of integrated planning. So we heard the wonderful initiatives that the City Council here under Mary Chay's leadership is bringing about. And I could say almost every one of those initiatives is also happening in New York. It's where I live. It's happening in other cities around the country and around the world. And typically it's kind of piecemeal. And we heard Kathleen Merrigan talk about the getting beyond silos. And this is true at city government. It's needed at state and federal and even international intergovernmental. Everything is siloed. So you've got agriculture here, health there, economic development there, at every level of governance. The really good news for us is that food is a silo buster. It is a very powerful win-win, cross-the-aisle content area to build coalitions around. So my work now is primarily I work in what a colleague calls the policy garden, for the food policy garden, and on the architecture of campaigns at all those levels. I teach about it, I work at the UN level, I work at the most local levels, and I work at the federal level. In fact, I can't believe it. I was just remembering that it's 25 years ago that I was working with Kathleen, who was then on the Senate Ag Committee on the Organic Foods Production Act representing farmers. So I come from a production side too, and it's that practice to policy link that is so important to keep alive, and why the farmers, as well as the supply chain actors or value chain actors, all need to be together there with the consumers, those who are interested in all kinds of other entry points into, which is why the food governance models that are emerging, like food policy councils, are so important, because they bring all those perspectives together. What's really interesting is that that kind of cross-sector, multi-stakeholder environment is happening at the international level right now. And it's being crafted in New York. And this is the last stage of a very intense new intellectual environment to push out a new development goal agenda for the world. And what's brand new is sustainable cities on one side. It's a brand new global goal. And what's also very exciting is a commitment to a transformative agenda in agriculture to shift away from fossil fuel-based food systems. This is very big. Put the two together, sustainable food systems and sustainable cities, which isn't not yet an architecture that's complete, by the way, and you get that need for integrated planning across rural and urban landscapes. This is where groups like EcoAg Partners come in because they know how to bring that down to earth. So
anyway, one thing I would be interested in probing, so Jay talked about, you know, by mid-century we're going to be at about 9+ billion globally, but one dimension of global demographics that we actually addressed a few years ago in a series on population is that we're also seeing a rapid urbanization. Large numbers of people moving from country to city. That something like by mid-century there will be almost as many people in cities as there are alive today. And so this connection between rural and urban is so important. Are there any examples that you can point to where you're already able to see, you know, whether it's a specific city or region where this kind of activity of linking urban and rural together is actually taking hold?
Yes, and in an incomplete way. So the arrival of food systems thinking that cuts across many different kinds of initiatives and pulls it together is quite new. New York City Council actually launched FoodWorks New York, which is the first effort to look at a full production to waste and everything in between approach, and how do you understand each of those interventions, policies and programs within a larger context. That seeing it within a larger context and then taking it out rural is very new for municipalities to do. So New York, I'll just stick with where I live for now. There are other examples around the country of cities doing this. New York has a 100-year+ history of investing in the ecosystem services, the term that's used these days. In this case, it's water. By owning a very large chunk of its watershed, and within that watershed, there's a lot of agriculture. And the management of that agriculture and its practices and their impact on the watershed has been going on for a long time. Taking that to the food system is happening, and it's happening through, to start with, procurement transparency. Where is the food coming into the city from for the roughly 20–25% of the New York City plate, which is $30 billion a year, is a public plate. That means that federal, state, or city dollars touch a huge portion of that plate. So for all of those procurement dollars that the public sector managed or has policy impact on, to put transparency in there to see where it's coming from is the first step.